If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what are the scariest glitch in the Matrix or supernatural things you have experienced? While at university, my friends and I ran out of booze. Hardly any shops were open because it was late, so the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in, there was just row after row of suburban houses, which all looked the same. As we were walking down one road, we passed a field with a large campfire and some people riding horses around it. There were people playing musical instruments, and there were general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire, and the lanterns that were dotted about, gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field and now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so, curious, we turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there. There were not just no people or horses, there was no field, just more and more houses. Even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road, as we'd simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighboring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't drunk, though we'd had some drinks, and so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night. When I was a kid, I was into magic tricks. I sat my parents down and showed them that I could make a large bouncy ball disappear by dropping it down my shirt. The idea was that I'd catch it before it fell all the way through and pretend it was gone. I failed a couple times as I demonstrated it, with the ball falling through my shirt and rolling to the couch each time. The last time I dropped the ball down my shirt, I didn't catch it, and it never came out. I searched and searched, but I couldn't find it. My parents congratulated me and resumed their chores. I never found the ball. I stopped doing magic tricks. I was in the car with my friend and his dad. Dad was driving, a friend was in the passenger seat, and I was in the seat behind the passenger on the right-hand side. As we slowly pass a fire hydrant before pulling into my friend's driveway, I noticed that it looks as if half of the hydrant is a foot taller and off to the side a bit. Between the two halves was a shimmering digital cluster duck. It then quickly snapped back into place before my very eyes. I thought I was just hallucinating until my boy up front mentioned it. "What the duck was that?" he said. "You see what I saw? The fire hydrant?" He confirmed that we had seen the same exact thing. I just asked him if he remembered it, and he does. We call it the glitch. My cat can open doors without touching them. I used to have my PC elsewhere in our house. When I was a kid, 12-ish, I had a cat, and I still have her. She's neither an inside nor an outside cat, she's both. Now, the following has happened many times. I noticed the cat meowing on our terrace, I let her in, then start walking towards the room's door to open it for her. The cat walks in front of me, sits down for like 3 seconds, and the door opens. The handle doesn't move, the door just clicks and opens slightly. This happened more than 4 times. My parents didn't believe me in the beginning, and the cat kind of stopped doing this, and I moved my PC to my own room, so I didn't get to see this. But then, one day, I noticed that my mom's room was locked when she was inside taking a nap. She had never locked it before, so I asked her about it. She said she must lock it, otherwise, the cat will come in the same way she left my room back in the day. I still don't know how the duck she does it. There was this creepy little room at the back of the school stage. There was no light, it was small, and it was locked from the outside. It gave us the heebie-jeebies. We were joking about backstage when we locked one of our friends in. He flipped his shit and started hammering on the door. We were all laughing like the bunch of assholes we were back then. Then his screams start mingling with the hammering and shaking of the door. We stop laughing, and we're all staring at the door. Then suddenly all the noise stops. We're all silent now, and then we start calling his name. No reply. Some of the bolder members of our group open the door and go in. He's not in there. We didn't believe them at first. But it's a tiny room, and he's not there. Then, as we started screaming his name and searching nearby, we spotted him through one of the windows coming towards the building. We can't believe it. We all ran to him. He says we let him out, and we just stared right through him. We were crowding the door to the room that the dark room was in. He did not pass by us. I still have no idea what happened that day. I think I was in 7th grade at the time, and it was around 3:30 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon. I was watching the post-school cartoon lineup with Rescue Rangers, DuckTales, and all that stuff. My mom is nowhere to be seen because she'd just duck off to Ike, where after my dad died and I was left to my own devices with dinner. Usually, I make microwave popcorn. That was what I got up to do this time. My room and the kitchen are both at the end of a really long hallway that, at its middle point, connects to an alcove that had the front door. I'm crossing the hallway from my bedroom to the kitchen and realize there's a figure standing in the hallway exactly halfway down, as though it had just come in through the front door. I stop and look at it, and it's there, looking at me. This thing didn't have any details to it the way that ghosts do in movies. It was a dark blue, opaque shape the size of a full-grown man. You could make out a head and limbs, but not hair, eyes, a mouth, or anything like that. I wasn't scared of it in the slightest. I just stood there and stared at it for a prolonged time because it was the duckin' middle of the afternoon and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Eventually I start to think this is a bit weird. Why is this thing in my house, and why is it just staring at me? So in my head, I think of the words "go away." I've never had a thought that felt like that one before. It was like I had said it out loud. It had weight behind it. The figure immediately turned and ran out of sight into the front door alcove. I ran down the hallway to the alcove too and found it empty. I spent several minutes standing there, questioning my own senses and whether that had really happened, what that thing was, or if I was going crazy. Then I went back down the hallway and made my popcorn. I was about 18 when I woke up one night and went to use the bathroom. I glanced in the mirror, scratched my nose, and my ear popped. Blood gushed out, and I collapsed to the floor, almost paralyzed, unable to make a sound, blacking out, knowing I was dying. Then I woke up in bed, my heart racing. Everything was exactly as it had been minutes before. No way. I thought. The next morning I ran into my friend and said, "I had the weirdest dream last night." Before I could explain further, he said, "Yeah, well, I dreamed I shot you." Every night I go to bed about 2 hours before my husband. I always wake up when he comes into the room. One night he was gaming with a friend, and hours later I heard him sneak into the room and crawl across the floor so he could pop up and scare me. I felt the floor kind of shake and felt him bump clumsily against the side of the bed in the dark. I held out my hand and asked him not to scare me. I was already scared enough and begged him to just take my hand and come to bed. I couldn't see anything in the room, but I knew he was there and just waited for him to jump up so I could move on and go back to sleep. That's when I heard him talking to his friend in the other room. I was frozen. I know there's sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming or something that explains this, but I would have sworn on my son's life that someone had crawled across the floor and jostled the bed. Eventually I worked out of the fear enough to grab my phone and text my husband to come in, turn on the lights, and check under the bed. But holy SHT, it boggles my mind how real it felt. 1985. My ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a streetlight, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed, asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve or oyster thing that opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed, over the pillows, towards the wall. I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "What is that shiny black clam thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog?" We had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. I was about 12 years old and woke up in the middle of the night needing to take a leak. I walked across the hall to the little bathroom, hit the lights, and was about to reach for the toilet when I glanced up and saw a face in the mirror. It was not my face. It was as if someone was on the other side, standing to the right with their face right next to the glass, staring at me. I only saw it for the briefest moment, but it is seared into my brain. I screamed and ran out of there to find my dad. Of course, my dad investigated, then calmed me down, or tried to. Eventually we had a prayer session because I was so freaked out. Eventually I must have gone back to sleep. Fast forward to my 30s. I'd forgotten all about the event. One night, while visiting, my dad quietly brought it up. "Remember that one time you saw a face in the mirror?" It suddenly came back to me in a rush of memory, sending a chill down my spine. "Yay, I remember." "Well," he said, "I sometimes think about that night." He looked down at the floor with a serious expression. "I saw it too." He went on to describe exactly what I'd seen. We have no idea what that was. Apparently, when he investigated, he saw it and had a freak out of his own. Apparently the prayer session was as much for his own nerves as mine. I respect him for keeping that tidbit from me until my 30s, but I kind of wish he'd never told me. I lived for 3 summers in a big old house that served as the rectory, church house, for the church where I was working. The minister was in and out all summer, and I was also there to house sit while he was on vacation. At the time, I was really into sleep tracking apps, and particularly sleep noise recording apps, to see if I could hear myself talking in my sleep. I ran it almost every night and never heard a single interesting thing. I barely snore, so I would hear the odd siren outside, the bed creaking as I rolled over, breathing, a fart, etc. One morning when I was alone in the house, the minister was on vacation. I opened the app to play back noises from the night before, all the usual stuff until the second to last recording. The recording was from around 3:30 to 4 in the morning. You can clearly hear me breathing, and I am not rolling around or moving much. If I had rolled or gotten up, the app would have recorded it, as it was an old and creaky bed. Suddenly, as you hear me breathing, there comes the noise of 3 very distinct and unmistakable raps of knuckles on wood, followed by a 2-second pause and the snapping of fingers. Tap, tap, snap. It was super unnerving, especially because there was no evidence that it was me doing it. It bothered me enough that I set the phone back down on the nightstand and tried to recreate the noise from anywhere that I could reach while laying on the bed, the frame, the bedside table, the nearby bookcase, but I could never get it exactly or figure out what wood was being tapped on. Whatever the case, the noise was distant enough that it could not have come from anywhere that I could have reached while lying in bed. I have never been prone to sleepwalking, talking, or even getting up in the night to go to the bathroom, so I am quite certain it wasn't me. This is something that has stuck with me and for which I have no answer. You know, I never believed in ghosts, glitches, etc., not really. I mean, sure, I was open to it, but I'm the kind of guy who likes proof. I annoyed my teachers and parents to death by always asking, but why? I want a good, solid reason to believe something. But then I moved to Southeast Missouri and saw some shit. 2 things stand out. The first was my roommate having scratches in groups of 3 appear all over her when there was no one upstairs but her and me, and neither of our hands were anywhere near her back where they were appearing. The house was definitely an unsettling place to live, and it turns out the original owner, a sick duck who molested a female relative, niece or daughter, records were unclear, was buried in the basement. He kept the girl in a closet and was very territorial about the house. I don't know how to explain it. That house has not had a steady occupant in a long time, though, and the owner has great difficulty renting it despite its cheap price and great location. It gives off such an unsettling vibe. Always feel like you're being watched. A lot of weird SHT went down there, but that's the worst experience I had. I moved out shortly after. Duck that noise. The other was this blind curve on a back road going to my Mills house. Late at night, tons of fog, deer, and stupid drivers are common, so I'm going slow. All of a sudden, off to my right, there's this swinging yellowish light. About the right height off the ground for someone to be standing there holding it. The problem is that no one was there. I pulled up level with it, and in an instant, it was gone. Nothing to reflect my lights was there, and nothing to mimic the movement. I got out and searched, but nothing. I even went back up the road a bit and drove down again to see if I could recreate it. Nothing. It turns out that 2 sisters died there. A rather well-to-do family-owned land in the area in the boonies. Big estate, lots of acreage, and nothing else around at the time. They took the curve too hard one night in their carriage and crashed. One sister died on impact. The other survived long enough to walk up and down the road, waving her lantern for anyone to see. They found her footprints all over in the morning, and she was clutching the lantern. She was dead, too. Locals have been known to see her lantern, but not her. Just that light, going back and forth. I felt chills down my spine when I heard that. The first week I moved into my new apartment, I woke up during the night for no apparent reason. I'm lying on my side, facing the wall, going through a mental checklist of what could have woken me up, bathroom, thirst, nausea, etc., when I feel a weight on the mattress near my feet, exactly as if someone just sat at the end of the bed. I completely freeze and wait, staring straight at the wall next to the bed. The weight stays there, and a few seconds later, I feel another smaller dip in the mattress, close to my back, and almost immediately a third one in front of me, about hip level. It feels like someone is sitting at the edge of my bed with their hands on either side of my body, staring at me. Eventually, the weights release one by one, and the feeling of being watched goes away. I slept on the couch for a week after that. My sister, her boyfriend, and I were all playing a board game in the living room. My sister gets up to go use the bathroom and walks down the hall and into the bathroom. About 10 minutes later, my sister walks down the stairs and sits back in the living room. Me and her boyfriend started freaking out about how she got upstairs. We both saw her go into the downstairs bathroom, close the door, and turn the light on. We both saw it and were both confused as duck. To make it even weirder, after my sister came downstairs, the downstairs bathroom still had the door shut with the light on. The door wasn't locked, but it was still really confusing. It was about 6 to 7 years ago, but we still joke about it today. My sister thinks we are both nuts, but we both know what we saw. Not one of us, both of us saw the exact same thing. My sister jokes with us and says she's the parallel dimension sister. 3 years ago, my childhood dog died very suddenly and unexpectedly. She was sick for a few days, but turned it around and got better before dying very quickly and painfully in my dad's arms. I live out of state, so I wasn't able to be there for any of it. It's a 6-hour drive, and I felt very guilty about her passing without me there. I had a very deep connection to her, and she had been my best friend for 12 years. I was devastated by her death. I couldn't work, eat, or do much of anything. I was constantly bursting into tears. It was just awful. My heart just ached, and I found myself apologizing to her for not being there. I just felt so guilty. One night, I had a dream about her. I dreamt I was in this empty space, and Charlie came running up to me, whimpering excitedly. She was licking my face and generally just freaking out, and I was sobbing. I knew she was dead, and I knew she was visiting me in my dream. I was very aware of it all. I kept hugging her, crying, and apologizing, and she just kept licking my face and being affectionate. I woke up with tears streaming down my face and sat up in bed. I could still smell her distinctive smell, and on my sleeve, I pulled off one of her hairs. She had never been to my apartment, and I hadn't seen her recently. It wasn't cat hair either, as Charlie was a collie mix, and their fur pattern is very distinctive. It may all be coincidence, but it was so vivid and real. I like to think she was visiting to let me know everything was okay and not to worry. I haven't had a dream like that since. I grew up in North Texas, and one of my friends has a cow farm and a lot of land. The name of the street he lived on was his family name. Me and my friends would go out there a lot on weekends, way out on the land far from his house, bring a guitar and some weed, make a campfire, and just hang out. One summer night, my friend asked if we wanted to see a haunted house. He said it wasn't really haunted per se, but it was way out in the middle of nowhere and abandoned. He said he'd driven by it a few times on farm routes, but he never had the stones to go explore it himself, especially not at night. It was one of those times where no one wanted to be the first to say no, so we all said yes. It was a cool, clear night, and we piled into my friend's sedan car. We were listening to some good old classic rock tunes and generally enjoying ourselves. We came to an area where we had to drive over a very old river, which was now a stream. This stream had eroded this patch of land for so long that it had become a very, very steep depression. There was a large plank of wood across the remainder of the stream, making it flat enough to drive across. Our friend assured us it was safe for the car, even though it looked like the angle was too steep for a car to cross without being damaged. By this point, the atmosphere had changed. We were no longer just hanging out all fancy-free. Few of us were speaking because we were just looking out the windows at the dark, looming trees and expanses of moonlit grass. We held our breath as we crossed the stream, and when we crossed it, there was a sea change in the way I felt. It was as if I could sense the house getting closer. No one had said a word for the past 10 minutes, other than my friend giving us time estimates of how much further we were from the house. There was nothing out here. Not even a paved road. There was a dirt road formed by cars, but it was very old and overgrown, as if it had not been used, except perhaps sparingly, for a decade. Suddenly, I became aware of something that had been present for a good portion of the trip but had occurred so slowly that I hardly noticed it. I broke the silence. Everything is black and white. I can only see black and white. Everyone else in the car started to freak out because they could only see black and white too. There was no color anywhere, just shades of black, like an old photo. "Are we dead?" I asked. I was convinced we had died along the way but had not been aware we were dead, like in a horror movie. I still have no explanation for this. We pulled up to the house. The color had returned, it seemed, but it was so dark that it didn't matter anyway. The house was 2 stories high, at a slight tilt, and the face of the house looked menacingly down at us. It was an old, southern house, with white pillars that had become discolored with age and faux balconies jutting out from under the second-story windows. About 50 meters from the house was a large, metallic silo. As the headlights from our car washed over the area, the darkness took its time to leave because it had become so settled there. We began walking slowly towards the house. In the front yard, there were lots of holes in the ground, freshly dug, about the size to fit a small, potted houseplant. Inside the holes, we found crumpled up pieces of paper. On the paper were crude drawings, like children's drawings. They were of people, stick figures. Some of the stick figures would be upside down or lying down. Some of the stick figures had faces, and they were all sad or yelling about something. We went to the silo. It was unlocked. We went inside with a flashlight and lit up the interior portion by portion with the beam from the flashlight. It was totally empty and gleamed like polished chrome. It smelled like sawdust and old oats. I swear I heard the sound of a girl crying, but that might have been the sound of the hinges on the door. Finally, we went to the house. The doors were all broken off the hinges. There was a screen door, and it was partly torn. We went inside. We broke up into groups and tried to explore the whole thing. We were all trying to seem brave, saying things like, "The thing I'm most afraid of is the floor falling in." There were closets, and we'd hold our breath before we'd open the doors, but we found nothing inside. The whole house was completely dark and empty. We only had one flashlight, so there might have been parts that we missed, but we wanted to get the hell out of there. We got back to the car. One of my friends dared someone to go into the house by himself, sit in the living room, and close his eyes for 30 seconds. He said he would do it. I couldn't believe it. I could never do that. He walked off proudly towards the house. We saw him go inside. The living room was the first room on the first floor, past the foyer beyond the door. Several minutes passed. We thought he was messing with us, wanting one of us to go in after him so he could give them a scare. That's when we noticed the smell. Something smelled awful in the car. My friend, who was driving, looked down and saw a dead cat crammed underneath the pedals. Then we noticed there was cat fur strewn about the car. We freaked out and started honking the horn and flashing the headlights at the house. Our friend didn't come out. Finally, me and my other friend went in after him. When he got to the living room, we found him sitting on the floor, huddled over, his back to a wall, his arms wrapped around his knees, and his head buried in his legs. He looked up at us as if we should run away, as if it were too late. We told him to get off his ass so we could get the duck out of there. He pointed at the wall behind us. The lights from the car were still flashing, trying to get us to leave. Each time the lights flashed, we could see it. All of our names were written on the wall in red. Later that summer, a friend of mine went back to the house during the day and burned it down. Some backstory. I spent a few years when I was between the ages of 5 and 9 in a haunted house. An old Victorian in an old, run-down town that used to be big before they shut the factories down. This house had a lot of history and a creepy vibe to it. My 2 sisters and my bedroom were upstairs. I had the back room, and it was always freezing cold in there, even in the hot months, and I had really vivid nightmares every single night. One night I dreamt I was standing in a corner of a large room, with a table to one side and a window and door to the other. There was a large, looming figure in a trench coat, unpacking a suitcase on a bed. The figure kept taking a piece of clothing out and spreading out their belongings. They stopped what they were doing and turned slowly to look at me. I didn't see their faces, but I was terrified and woke up in a cold sweat. I ended up switching rooms with my half-sister, who only stayed with us in the summertime because of my nightmares. Fast forward to age 16, my mom and I had to move out of her boyfriend's house in a hurry. It was an unexpected move, and we really had nowhere to go. My mom's friend offered her parents' house because they were vacationing overseas for a few months and they had an in-law apartment underneath their main living area. So we could temporarily stay there until my mom could find something a bit more permanent. I walk in the door and see one big bed with a table by a window. I put my suitcase on the bed, still wearing my trench coat, because I wanted to unpack and then go for a walk. I start taking out my luggage when I feel eyes on my back coming from the corner of the room, and that's when that nightmare I had when I was 6, 10 years prior to the present day, clicks in my head. I'm ducking terrified. I slowly turned to look at the corner of the room, and there was nothing there. But in that moment, I saw it not only through my eyes but also in my mind's eye of that nightmare. And ever since then, I have constant déjà vu. One night I was bored sitting at home, so I became a little restless and decided to drive through town and listen to music. I live in a rural area, and I've just been driving around on back roads mostly. I got to a stop sign, and a song I was very into at the time came on, so I turned up the volume and continued driving straight. I get to the end of that kind of long road and make a left turn. I drive a long way down the next road and make another left turn so I can start heading back towards town. The song is nearly over at this point. I get to another stop sign, look both ways, and continue on straight. The song is somehow still going, so I think maybe there was an extra chorus in there that I had just forgotten about. I get to another stop sign and realize that I'm back to the place where I had made that first left turn, but the song is now playing the beginning of the first verse again, like it had started over. I'm thoroughly creeped out at this point and consider making different turns this time around, but I end up following the same path and listening to the same song. This time, though, the song ends in the place where it should have ended the first time. After that, I drove straight home, and for days I couldn't stop trying to figure out what happened, but I really couldn't explain it. Me and my friend were driving down this straight road in our rural town 2 or so years ago. Just listening to music and goofing around. It's about 1 a.m. and very dark, as there are no houses along this stretch. It's basically like 15 kilometers of straight 2-lane road with kind of ditches on either side leading to forest. I'm looking down at my phone for a few seconds when my friend suddenly says, "What the duck?" And I look up. There's this thing crawling across the road. About 7 feet long, built like a person but on all fours, and it looked like it was almost crab walking, like stomach up. It had pale, white skin that was kind of loose looking. The worst part was its face. When our lights hit the thing, it looked at us and stopped, and its eyes were a cloudy white, but you just felt it stare right into your eyes. It was the most overwhelming and scary feeling I've ever had. Me and my friend, both 18 at the time, broke down crying as soon as we got past it. It felt like time had stopped for us to see it, and then it was just gone. I've never been quite as scared as that moment, and we are both convinced some creature escaped a lab or some dimensional shit. Either way, we don't go near there anymore because there is something dangerous and scary living in those woods. I was around 7 years old when I ran through the backyard at a friend's house. Around my neck was a cloth cord, and hanging from it was a bronze stamped medallion that I had gotten at a recent Renaissance fair. As I was running, I tripped like the klutz I was and fell forward, the necklace and medallion flying off my neck and landing a few feet in front of me. I started to get up and look at the necklace, but then I froze. It was sinking into the ground. The metal part was swallowed first, along with the rest of the cord. I was so shocked that I couldn't move. I was able to snap out of it and lunge forward, grasping at the last piece of the cloth before it was pulled under. I sat staring and poking at the ground for a good 10 minutes after that. It was completely solid. I never saw it again, and I have no idea what happened. I used to have these very vivid dreams that were all part of an overall story. They took place in an alternate universe with magic, demons, and shit. Myself and some friends, these people weren't real, mind you, were freedom fighters in the war. The dreams were never in order, and I wrote them down after waking up, figuring out where they were placed on the timeline by taking note of particular details. For instance, in some of the dreams, I was always alone and incredibly powerful. In others, I was pretty much just an average kid and had all those friends around me as we snuck around trying to rescue POWs. One night I had a particularly dark dream where one of my friends, his name was Luke, was sitting on a rooftop, threatening to jump. I went up there to try and talk him out of it, and we ended up having a long conversation about how he couldn't see the point in fighting anymore now that she's dead. So this was pretty surprising. The she that was being referred to was his girlfriend, Maddie. In the later dreams in the timeline, she was never there, so this sort of explained why she disappeared from the dreams. That was during the Christmas break in 2009. When school started in 2010, I met Maddie for the first time when she started at my school. She looked exactly the same, had the same laugh, the same mannerisms, and everything. I definitely had never met her before, and yet there she was. Not just alive, but actually ducking real. Once in college, some friends and I drove out of the city and down a country road in a secluded area so we could smoke pot and cruise around. We didn't really have a secure place to smoke near campus, and we were dumb enough to think it was safer in a moving vehicle. So after nightfall, we are on our way back to town, and it seems out of nowhere we are in this massive traffic jam on this country road. There are tons of cars in front of us and even cars trying to pass on the shoulder. Cars were racing past going the other way, which really didn't lead anywhere. There just seemed to be a kind of pandemonium, like we were driving around a sports stadium after a game. There were no lights from a police car or fire truck. There is no evidence of a crash. Nothing. We were literally screaming because it was so weird. It all came out of nowhere. It was a 2-lane road that didn't lead anywhere, yet there were tons of cars jammed up. Then it just seemed like all the cars were gone. The traffic let up, and we were cruising along again, but I don't remember seeing cars in front of us or behind us anymore. It was like we were alone on the road. We lost it and couldn't stop talking about it for like a week. When my brother and I were younger, 12 to 14, my parents took us and our 2 older sisters to see a scary movie, Signs, I think. We left maybe halfway through the movie after getting complaints for running out of the theater. That night, my brother and I were too scared to sleep alone, so we both slept on my parents' floor. Their whole outside wall has windows that look out to our front yard. We have a lot of land, so it's a big field and then woods pretty much all around the house. We can't sleep being so scared, and we were just talking about how it's all not real and there's nothing to worry about. I convinced him to look out the window with me, see nothing, and show him we were just being babies. Being the older brother, I was really just trying to be brave. We count to 3 and both sit up and look out the window. We both froze in fear as there was nothing but instead a shadow of what looked like an 8-foot guy with a tail and a long nose. We watched as it took a few steps forward, walking towards the front door. My brother grabbed my arm, and the thing stopped mid-step and looked at us. I felt the glowing red eyes see my fear, everything left my body. We both hit the floor and pray it doesn't just eat us through the wall. Curled up in the fetal position, the next thing I know, it's morning. I think it's all a dream, and I'm going to get some breakfast. I meet my brother out there, as he woke up first, and he tells me of his dream, the same exact thing. The only difference is that when the thing looked at us, he said it looked right at him, but I swear it looked at me. Now we're both freaking out because it's not a dream anymore. We ran outside and looked at the ground where we saw it, and sure enough, there were big footprints. But, only 3. The 3 steps we saw it take. I'm getting chills writing this because it's haunted me for 15 years. My brother has convinced himself that I convinced him that it all happened. I think that's just his mind coping with it. I've never felt the same way when I go into the woods. This happened around 1991. It's the middle of the night. I'm standing in my sister's living room, and it must be a full moon, because even though it's around 1 a.m. and the lights are off, I can see clearly. There's a mixing bowl with popcorn kernels in the bottom on the floor in front of the TV, and some rental VHS are in a pile nearby. I hear a noise and turn around to see my sister's normally very friendly Labrador retriever looking like Cujo. Fangs bared, snarling, hackles raised. Suddenly, there's a bright flash of light, and I wake up like I hit the bed from a great height. I think, that was a weird dream. Eventually, I fall back to sleep, and in the morning I call my sister, planning to tell her the story, but she preempts me by telling me about the weird thing that happened in the night. They woke up to the sound of the dog snarling at about 1 a.m. Her husband thought there was a prowler in the house, got a gun, and went to find the dog. She was standing in the living room, snarling at the middle of the room. He couldn't see anyone, so he flipped on the light. No one was there. The dog instantly stopped snarling and walked to her bed like nothing had happened. He checked the property and went back to bed. We talked a bit, and I found out they watched some rental movies. Of course we had popcorn. Why? My sister is a little woo-woo at times, so I decided not to tell her about my night. She lived about 450 miles away, by the way. I remember being pretty young, like 9 or 10, and I was in the car park of a pub in England, Southend. I remember seeing someone in their teens in the window of a house looking over the car park. They waved at me, and I felt like I knew them somehow. My parents asked who I was waving at, and I said just some lady in the window over there. I didn't think much of it. Fast forward 10 years. I was at my nan's new house. I remember walking into her room, which I was never allowed to do, and going to the window. I then realized I was in the house, looking over that same parking lot, and remembering that interaction years before. Then a girl around 9 or 10 who was in said car park waved at me, and I waved back. I felt like I knew her. I could not explain it and have never told anyone about it. It freaked me out. 10 years ago, I was returning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later, we came around a bend. It was a full moon, and we could see the reflection from a lake below us. Other than that, the road was completely empty. Suddenly everything went completely dark in the car, no lights from the dash, gauges, or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about 1/4 mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second, as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar, though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat abruptly forward and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it had just a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I am missing an hour of my life, and to this day I have no idea how it happened. I had just come back from a 15-hour shift. It was 10 p.m. I haven't worked double in a while, so I was very tired. I was on the 91 motorway, in California, at the Atlantic Avenue exit before the 710 motorway. I was fighting sleeplessness a few minutes ago and told myself I could stay awake. My exit home is only a few more miles away. I dozed off. My internal clock kicked in, and I whipped my head back to wake myself up. What I saw more than shocked me. I was sitting in the car garage. I looked at the clock, and about 15 minutes had passed. So I dozed off for 15 minutes, although it felt like no more than 1 second. I managed to drive in my sleepy state 3 to 4 miles off the exit, through 2 lights, punch in the code to open the public garage, park my car, and wake myself up. I got out of the car and looked around, making sure I didn't run anyone over. Yup. No blood, no brains, no evidence of body tissues. I followed the news in the area for a few days, and there were no fatal hit and runs. A little background, this is one of my earliest memories, so I was probably between ages 2 and 3, and I lived in a ranch-style home in a nice neighborhood. The only people at home were me and my mom, my sister was at school, and my dad was working. It's a nice day out, probably right around noon. It's hot, so we've got the front door open with the screen door locked. I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, which is only 2 or 3 feet from the door, playing with a toy cash register. Scene set. I look up from my toy and see a man standing behind the screen door. I don't remember him walking up the driveway, I just remember him suddenly being there. He's wearing a police outfit. I'm confused, and he just kind of smiles at me. I should mention that I wasn't scared at all. There was a policeman at the screen door, and in my young mind, there was nothing off about that. So I told my mom that there was a man at the door. My mom was in the kitchen, which was attached to the living room, so it didn't take long for her to come to me. She walked into the room, and immediately I could tell something was very, very wrong. She paused once she saw the man and then power walked straight for me, picked me up, and ran into the hallway where we couldn't be seen from the door. I remember being held close to her chest and being extremely confused. She looked extremely frightened. We stayed there for a while, and eventually, when we came back out, the man was gone. The memory ends there. Nearly 2 decades later, I still don't have a clue what happened that day. A few years ago, I brought it up with my mom, but she kind of just brushed off the question, and I didn't push it. Now I'm just afraid to ask. I still think about it from time to time, and I think it's insane how well I remember that moment, the texture of the couch, the toy, the policeman, his smile, my mother's face. I don't remember anything else in my life that well. The moment was just so tense that I don't think I'll ever forget it. My grandmother passed when I was young, maybe 8. When I was around 16, I had a dream that I was hanging out with her and talking and catching up. She stood up in the dream to leave, and I begged her not to and asked when I could see her again. She said nothing but pointed to a calendar that had a date circle. I remembered the date when I woke up. It was several months in the future. I told my mom about my dream, as she was always interested in that kind of stuff. Several months go by, and the date in the dream is approaching within the next few days. My cousin's husband gets killed in a freak car accident, and my parents fly across the country to be with family. They are to go over the date in the dream, and my mom, being superstitious about the dream, makes me promise not to leave the house that day. I agree, no big deal, my parents were going to be gone. What did I need to leave for? The day in the dream arrives, and my friend calls me up to ride into the city with him. I say no thanks. Late that night, I got a call from him saying that he was in a bad car accident and that his car was totaled. Passenger side all smashed to hell. Had I been with him? Driving home from a trip on an interstate, we had traveled up and down since I was in first grade. I took an exit to get gas, and of course the gas station is 1.3 miles away. I ended up driving there, and it was all woods and fields until we got to what was a sad excuse for a gas station. My mom was sleeping in the passenger seat, so I alerted her that I was going to use the restroom and would be right out. It seemed like a bunch of country folk based on the lifted trucks and an old dude with his grandson and dog in a Mustang. As I walked up, a kitten came up meowing, so I picked it up. The gas station attendant came out and said I could keep it since someone left it there. I went straight back to the car, told my mom to hold my new cat, and went to grab an energy drink and use the restroom. The restroom seemed like an afterthought since it was basically plywood and the inside was covered in Sharpie graffiti. I went back out to the car, and the old man came up with his grandson and started telling me that there had been a lot of kittens running around his farm and asked if I wanted to trade the one I just picked up. I said we didn't have time, and I liked the cat I had found. He said, "Well, have a safe trip. That's a special cat, right there." My family and I have never found the exit where I got my cat, and they've checked off each exit they've visited on trips. I've had the cat for 7 years now. I don't think that gas station or exit was meant to be found, and I doubt we will ever find it again. I grew up in a wee village on the west coast of Ireland, and our childhood tales were filled with stories of the good people, what older folk called the fairies. My older brother, my older cousin, and I were visiting my grandma on Christmas Eve. We went out to take a look at the turkey that was hanging by its feet from a hook in the ceiling of his dark wooden shed. The turkey was plucked and looked horrifyingly big and scary to my 8-year-old eyes. Just as we inch up to the turkey and I'm about to reach out to touch it, they run from the shed and bang the door shut from behind them. I freak the duck out. Hollering. Banging. Screaming. Kicking the door, and then, suddenly, I just go quiet. And crouch back by the wall. I knew what I was doing. I wanted to scare them. Their laughter stopped. They called my name. I knocked on the door a time or two. I stayed home. Nervous laughter from outside the door. I didn't breathe. Another minute or two, and they're barreling through the door. Deep into the shed looking for me. I quietly stepped out and was about to lock them in when I decided to just go back into my grandma's house. I sat next to him at the table. My brother and cousin come running in. Terrified that I've disappeared. I just sat there. "How'd you get out?" they asked. "He's been here all the time," my grandma said, without missing a beat. They protested, but we locked him in the shed. My grandpa got them to tell the tale, and then we all went out to look in the shed. "There's no way anyone could escape from the shed," he said, before adding, "Careful of the good people, lads, they'll often look just like regular folk, and you have to be on your best behavior or they'll steal you away." To this day, nearly 40 years later, I've never told either my brother or cousin what happened. My relatives poke fun at them every now and then because, as kids, they told everyone they'd seen one of the good people and trapped him in a shed. My brother and cousin laugh along good-naturedly, but you can see that question still burning in their eyes. What the hell did we see that day? As a teenager, I used to have recurring dreams every night for months. I was sitting at a table on the patio of a restaurant. I was out there alone, waiting for my food. A homeless man comes up to the other side of the patio and asks for change. I'm digging in my wallet for a couple dollars, and then I hear tires screech and look up to see a crash in an intersection near the restaurant. I run out there to see if I can help, and as I run out into the road, I get hit by a car and wake up at the impact. After a while, the dream stopped, and I put it out of my mind. Fast forward to me being 28 and sitting at on the border on the patio, waiting for my food. A homeless guy comes walking past the restaurant but doesn't stop and ask for change. It makes me think about that dream, though, and I start to feel uneasy. Shortly after, I hear the tires screech, and I see a wreck happen in the intersection near the restaurant. I begin to run out there but stop at the sidewalk and look out towards incoming traffic, and there is an SUV not slowing down. She was on her phone and blew through the intersection, completely unaware of what had just happened. Ran out and checked on the people. Everyone was fine. One day I was biking with my friends. I had to stop to tie my shoe. 2 of my friends went ahead of me, and the other 3 waited for me. I finally finished and got back on my bike, and we started to bike to catch up with my friends. We look ahead and see them make a left behind a strip mall. We biked over there to find that they weren't there anymore. We had no clue what just happened, and we all agreed that we saw them. Suddenly, I get a call on my phone from one of my friends. He says that friend 2's phone ran out of battery, so they went back to his house to charge it. But the thing is, his house is all the way across town. I said, "How the hell did you get over there so fast?" Sounding very confused, he said, "When you stopped to tie your shoe, we biked ahead and went to friend 2's house." I didn't believe him and asked him to send a picture of them. He did. I started to freak out and say that we just saw you guys go behind the strip mall, not even a minute ago. He said he had no clue what I was talking about and said just meet us at my friend's house. He hung up, and I told my friends what happened. They were all very confused too. We still have no clue what happened on this day. Definitely the weirdest and creepiest thing ever. I used to love just sitting on a swing in my backyard at night and listening to music. It was, and still is, really cathartic because I live basically right on the edge of a fairly large and densely wooded area. Also, my best friend B lived 2 houses down from me and went running every single night, rain, snow, sleet, sick, whatever, and I could probably count on one hand the number of days he hasn't gone running in the past 10 years or so. There isn't any wildlife where I live that I'm really nervous about, aside from bobcats or maybe black bears or coyotes, but all of those avoid people, and I've never heard of someone seeing a bear where I'm from. Also, I make it a point to try to work through things as rationally as possible, and I also make it a point for myself to try not to freak out about random creepy stuff because I hate feeling afraid or helpless, and there's always an explanation. Anyways, one night, just like any other night, around maybe 10 p.m. or so, I decided to go sit on the swing. I gathered my jacket, headphones, and a beer and walked outside. Immediately upon stepping onto my driveway, I got this really weird feeling, like I was being watched. Thinking nothing of it because it was nighttime and it was probably just my primitive brain, I turned the corner by the edge of the house and started walking back towards the swing set. Every step that I took, that uneasy feeling got stronger and stronger, until it had almost reached panicky levels. I could feel it in my stomach, my body suddenly felt very cold, and at this point, I accepted mentally that I was alarmed about something. However, I still rationalized it as my primitive brain just doing its job. The weird thing is, as I got closer to the swings, I started getting more and more nervous than I already was. I reflexively started walking slower, to the point that eventually I came to a complete stop about 10 feet away and, accepting that something felt really weird, began to look around and at the woods. Something was seriously wrong. It felt different outside than ever before. Now, I'm a pretty big guy and athletic. I say that to emphasize that I was in no way concerned about a person walking out of the woods. In the absolute worst case scenario, I feel comfortable asserting that I'd be able to outrun 95% of people, and that's if I couldn't physically best them. I just say that to emphasize that the possibility of some dude hanging out in my backyard and hurting me wasn't even on my radar. Also, there are no recorded confirmed black bear attacks where I'm from, and chances are high that I'd survive a black bear and or a bobcat attack, barring freak circumstances. And, like I mentioned earlier, there haven't been any bears seen in my town that I know of, and I feel like it would take a really scared, rabid, or hungry bobcat or coyote to just randomly come out of the woods to attack a person. I say that to emphasize that I wasn't really concerned about any wildlife. Additionally, I kind of go out of my way to make it a point to not be afraid of stuff, even when I am. Like, the concept of being afraid scares me more than most things, so I work pretty hard at suppressing that. Anyway, I tried to force the weirdness out of my mind, but as I settled down on the swing, I was afraid. I had no idea why or of what, and I was trying to suppress it, but I knew deep down I was scared. Something was seriously ducking wrong. Now, usually, I'll swing for like an hour or so, maybe going through like 20 to 25 songs. And, obviously, I jam out, so I turn the volume all the way up, and I just kind of zone out and daydream. So, I swung, swang, through one song, pausing the music every once in a while to listen to the night, which I never do. I literally got through one song, stop and go, and the feeling just kept getting stronger. It wasn't the normal hairs standing up on the back of your neck that scared you. It literally felt like there was this overwhelming, malicious presence that was just heavy in the air. I swear, I could almost feel it just pressing down on me from all around. It felt hateful, and I never use this word because I think it's been cheapened by religious fanatics, but it was evil. There's no way around it. Something bad, really bad, was there. Something was really, really ducking wrong. So, I got up and turned to swing facing the woods, which I never used to do because my friend B would sneak up on me from the front yard sometimes if I did that. I got through maybe half of the next song, and somehow this feeling continued to get stronger. It felt urgent. I've read in books descriptions like bone-chillingly terrifying and too scared to move, and I always kind of shrugged them off as hyperbole. I certainly had never experienced anything even close to that until that night. I was ducking terrified, and I feel like I can't emphasize that enough, like, I can't properly verbalize this feeling. I swear to God, I could feel it in my bones and my muscles. I was literally shivering. I've never been worried like that before. I'm a person, I reign supreme over all the animals. But in that moment, it hit me like an epiphany, I felt like prey. I couldn't see anything bad out there, I couldn't hear anything or smell anything, but I was completely and utterly horrified beyond all rationality. Like, almost on the brink of tears. I didn't know why, and I couldn't rationalize it, so I tried to just go on with what I was doing like nothing was up, but it just kept getting. The only way I can think to describe it is heavier, heavier, and heavier. You know those videos of the mice shaking with terror before they're eaten by a snake? That's probably the closest description of what I looked and felt like. I turned my music off and just sat, beer forgotten, looking around and at the woods. Searching. I was desperately searching for anything that could explain how I felt, so I could write it off as a stupid overreaction on my part. I was completely still, except for my head, refusing to surrender to my baser instincts, despite everything in me telling me to run. It was a warm summer night, and I was freezing. I know how corny that sounds, but I swear, I think about this moment several times a week, and it was years ago. I could feel it all the way to my bones, and my stomach was a knot of ice. It was seriously the strangest feeling I've ever had. I could just feel this sense of impending doom and this utterly malicious presence. It was like a panic attack, mixed with that stomach-dropping feeling when you know something bad happened but you don't know what, mixed with when you hear something in the house that you know had to be a person, but your family hadn't said anything about coming to the house that night. It was all of those feelings combined, along with the feeling that you're being watched and that feeling you get when you know someone doesn't like you but you don't know why. It was all of those feelings combined with raw terror, amplified like 100 times. I've never been more scared in my life. I literally couldn't take it anymore. Physically, I just couldn't take it. I could barely breathe, I was such a mess. I jumped off the swing and sprinted back inside, closed and locked the door, checked all the doors and windows, closed all the curtains, turned on all the lights, and surrounded myself with an arsenal of melee weapons in the middle of the living room. I could still feel it, but it slowly faded. I didn't sleep that night, which never happens to me. I can pass out almost at a whim. But I was too high-strung to sleep, eat, or leave the couch. I just sat. No TV. No books. I just sat there, thinking about what the duck just happened. The next morning, I saw my friend be out by his car. So, I walked over and started telling him about it because I was so confused and pretty deeply disturbed by the experience. Even after that long body of text, I don't feel like I've conveyed how bizarre and terrifying it actually was. So, as I'm telling him, he held up a hand and said, hold on, stop right there, come with me." So, we went into his house, and we walked up to his little sister, S. He said, "Hey S, what did I say last night when I came in from running? Why didn't I go running last night?" And she looked at us weirdly and said something to the effect of, "You felt like something was out there, and you didn't feel safe." She said that, completely unaware of what I'd been saying. Apparently, because he lives 2 houses down from me, he walked outside to stretch before his run that night and felt a weird vibe. As he walked to the end of his driveway, it got stronger, and he started getting nervous. He started running and stopped after a few feet. He turned his music off and scanned the woods. Then he started running again, got to my driveway, and was so scared, uncomfortable, and freaked out that he just decided to call it quits for the night. He never does that. When we were talking about it the next day after talking to his sister, he said that he literally felt like a prey animal being stalked by something evil. It was exactly, almost to the T, how I'd felt. Everyone always kind of laughs it off when we tell them that story or thinks we somehow colluded and matched our stories up, but he specifically took me in to talk to us before I spoke so that I'd know there was no bullshit. I have absolutely no idea what it was, and it hasn't happened again since, and that was like 3 or 4 years ago. Anyways, now I only swing facing the woods, and I carry a bat down there with me, even though I don't feel like I need it. But just in case.